I just want to welcome everybody here. We're so glad to have you. The Racial Justice Ministry team is just beyond excited that we've been able to host the Faith Enrichment for this month and have Pastor Dave and Marge do the first 2 weeks, where Pastor Dave talked about doing the March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King and going to Selma and his experiences with that, as well as his experiences at multiple parishes in Detroit and in Flint, Michigan, and in Oxford, Ohio, and sort of how his view on race has pervaded. He has been a bridge builder, I think, his entire life, and has continually done beautiful things to just further relationships. And it's been an honor to have heard his and Marge's story. And now it's going to be an honor for us to hear from Beryl. And one of the things I was saying earlier is Beryl's pretty humble. I know Beryl because our kids go to school together. So I met Beryl when we moved here back in 2016. But Beryl's got quite the resume. And so she's not, I think, typically going to tell all of that. But one of the things that is amazing that she's going to talk about tonight is just the fact that she was the director for international communications with Mrs. Rosa Parks. And so she's got a ton to tell us about that, and we're super excited about it. I know that Sharon specifically has a prayer to kick us off tonight. So Sharon, if you can go ahead and start us with that, that would be great.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everybody. So I saw this prayer a couple of days ago on my Facebook page. Where else do you find stuff nowadays? But I thought it was really appropriate. It was written by Archbishop Romero from San Salvador and El Salvador, and that may not be a concept for a lot of people. He's actually considered a saint in the Catholic Church because back in 1980, he was assassinated for his work, actually killed in his church while celebrating Mass for his justice work in El Salvador. So I thought that this would be a great start to our topic tonight. So let's pray together. Gracious and loving God, we cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in that. This enables us to do something and to do it well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, and not messiahs. We are the prophets of a future that is not our own. Be with us tonight as we hear what you have to tell us in the stories that Beryl will share with us about Mrs. Park. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Now, a couple of quick logistical things just for all of you. For those of you who might be less familiar with Zoom, at your top right corner of your screen, you should have some options for the view. So you can choose speaker view or gallery view, but that should be helpful in terms of you having a screen where you can see Beryl as well as the rest of us very well, okay? And the other piece I would ask is if you all can mute your own screens. There should be a mute button on the bottom left corner so that you can mute yourself so that we can all hear Beryl well without background noise. And then if you've got a question or want to speak, you can unmute yourself for that as well. So did those components make sense to everybody? Thumbs up if that kind of makes sense and that is clear to everybody? Okay. All right. All right. Well, again, we are just thrilled to be able to have this time with Beryl talking to us about Mrs. Rosa Parks, and she can tell us even more about that.
Well, I have a question to start with. The Q&A will be at the end.
Is
Yes.
that correct?
And I'm sorry, thanks for reminding me of that. For people who haven't been here before, what we typically have set this up as has been the beginning half has been a presentation, so about 30 minutes or so of presentation. And then we come back and we send people off into smaller breakout rooms so that you've had a chance to process and think through some questions and some discussion. And our favorite question so far for racial justice has been, whatever the presentation is, how does this connect with your thinking? How does it expand your thinking? How does it challenge your thinking? So that's one of the questions that you can kind of even be having in your head right now as you're listening. And I bet we could probably have Sharon type that in the text chat if she can. That would be great. The other one that I know Beryl, I think, is going to touch upon some tonight is thinking about not, and you may not have time for this in your breakout room. So you can kind of think about this. You might talk about it in your breakout room. You might think about it between this week and next week. Sort of, why are you here? Or what engages you about this topic of racial justice? What's in your background? What's drawing you into this? Because kind of helping to know your own history and how kind of you're engaging with this is helpful in thinking about how things go forward from here and how they progress. Part of knowing your history helps you know where you're going next. So those are some things to maybe ponder as we continue. Any other questions from the group or from Beryl specifically? If that all makes sense, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to turn it over to Beryl.
Well, thank you. It is a delight and pleasure to be here. Greetings to all the ministers as well as the participants of the Racial Justice Committee. I am just overjoyed and have been excited about this. I attended the first two sessions, and tonight, to pick up on what has been shared, I am going to elaborate on the comment on Mrs. Parks. I've read, and particularly in children's books, and also heard often the reference to Rosa. In the African American community, elders are referred to by their titles. And so you will hear me refer to Rosa Louise Macaulay Parks as Mrs. Parks. When we went on tour, because of Mrs. Parks's stature, not just as stature, also as a, well, she probably didn't think of herself as an icon, but as an icon, as well as somebody who was a soldier in the effort for social justice. Whenever we entered a room, everybody stood up to honor the fact that she was a dignitary in that regard, and referred to her as Mrs. Parks. And I wanted to just read two sentences from the book, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks by Jean Theo Harris, which is this book here. And I was reading this to Pastor Sarah earlier. And the author is saying that she refers in the book to Mrs. Parks as Parks, but she says, but I interchange this with Mrs. Parks, the title of form of respect that white people of the era routinely denied Black women, and the way many people who respected her referred to her. Using the honorific then does more than assert Parks' marital and family status. It also adds a degree of dignity, distance, and formality to mark that she is not fully ours as a nation to appropriate. So, Mrs. Rosa Louise Macaulay Parks. She was born in Tuskegee, Alabama on February 4th, 1913. She entered school in Montgomery, Alabama in 1924. And she lived in a town called Pine Level, Alabama. So she was in a rural area. I actually lived on a farm and lived with her mother and her maternal grandparents. Her mother was a teacher. Her father was a carpenter and a builder, and he traveled a lot. She didn't see him actually a lot. And she grew up at a time when A lot of soldiers were coming back from World War I. The African-American soldiers were fighting in a war for our country and came back and didn't have the respect that they thought they should as American citizens, but the time was that of Jim Crow. It was of segregation, and it was of not having the respect of having African Americans treated as first-class citizens. So there was a resurgence of the Klan during that time period. Her parents and grandparents taught her that she was somebody, despite the racial challenges and tensions. She believed that, and she didn't understand, knowing as she went through school, reading the Constitution and other things, why she and other Black people, or the word of that day was colored, would be treated the way they were treated. Her grandfather and grandmother, in their fostering this positive sense of self, would challenge people basically to mess with them, like leave us alone. And the grandfather would, even in the evenings and sometimes sleep at night on the porch with his rifle, so that he would be able to confront right on any intruders, Klans people, what have you. And sometimes Rosa Parks would be out there with him on the porch and maybe even fall asleep out there on the porch with her. So she always was someone who challenged the then status quo, actually throughout her whole life, the status quo, in trying to fight for equality and justice, voting rights, and much, much more. So I share this to give you background that she had within her a deep, deep sense of what was for her right, that there needed to be social justice, that there needed to be equality. And she looked at people who, particularly African Americans, who fought the system, as people she admired. So let me continue with the timeline that I have. In 1929, she leaves school to care for her grandmother. In 1932, she marries Raymond Parks in Pine Level, Alabama. Raymond Parks was the first person outside of her family who had that kind of get up and go and was not afraid to confront white people. He was working with the NAACP and working on the Scottsboro case. She greatly admired that, and every time he would go out to a meeting, she didn't know if he would come back alive. But that was the challenge that she took on, and even said throughout her life, if I have to die to be able to right the wrongs, I'm willing to do that. You see where I'm going? So when we get to December 1st, 1955, this is not anything new for her. Let me continue with the timeline. So in 1934, she receives her high school diploma. 1943, she becomes secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. She thought at first women couldn't be a member because mainly men would attend. But then she saw in the newspaper one of her classmates from school, who was a female, and attending a meeting, which encouraged her even more so to become involved. And she went to the meeting and there was nobody to take notes, and guess who became the secretary? So she becomes the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP in 1943. 1943, she also tries to register to vote and is denied. And many of you know there are all kinds of things that were done to keep African Americans or coloreds at that time from voting. How many jelly beans are in a in the jar? Read and interpret the Constitution. I mean, all the poll taxes. If you didn't own land, then how are you going to pay a poll tax? Grandfather clauses. If your grandfather could vote, you could vote. Well, her grandparents were slaves. So all kinds of things to discourage her. But she, again, had that fight within her. Also in 1943, she's forced off a bus for not entering at the back door. In the South, and specifically in Montgomery, if you were colored, you had to put your money in the money, in the front, in the money turnstile, but then you had to get off the bus and go to the back of the bus and then get on and sit in the back. As I was sharing with Sarah, and I'll talk more about this next time, at that point, she was still maturing in her sense of bucking certain rules and regulations. And that was one of them. Because later on, she did not do that. But again, more on that later. In 1944, she's again denied the opportunity to register to vote. In 1945, she finally receives a certificate for voting. In 1949, she becomes an advisor to the NAACP Youth Council. In 1955, she meets the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in 1955, I'm getting feedback. Anybody else here in the field?
Jim Huffer, can you mute?
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Okay. So December 1st, 1955, she does not give up her seat to a white man on a Montgomery bus. Before I go any further, this timeline doesn't mention in the summer of 1955 is when Emmett Till was brutally murdered. And then he was from Chicago. His parents or his mother sent him to the South to be with his family for the summer, and he was murdered. His body was all mangled, and his body was shipped back to Chicago for a funeral. And his mother wanted an open casket funeral, and there were journalists there from all over the world. And that was to show, the pictures were allowed, and that was to show the face of racism. So one of the questions I saw in something that Sarah wrote was, what was Rosa Parks thinking while she was waiting for this policeman to come? Because she was asked to go to the back of the bus, and she refused to do that, as you know. Also, something to clarify that's in many books is that she was not sitting in the front of the bus. She was sitting in the middle section. And that middle section was like a discretionary section. There even was an arm that came up. I don't mean a person's arm, a sign that came up that said either white or colored. And so you could sit there if the arm wasn't up, and or I guess if it said colored, and you were colored, but when the bus started getting crowded and a white male got on the bus, that meant everybody in that discretionary section that was colored or black had to go to the back. Now, with all the things that I've shared with you, and I've only given you really a broad brush of some of the things Rosa Parks experienced throughout her lifetime, she had gotten to the point where she wasn't this old lady. First of all, she was 42. So I don't know if you all consider that old. She was 42 years old, coming home from work, and she got on the bus, and she knew all of what had been going on recently, including Emmett Till. Emmett Till's death was a major thing in the United States, as well as around the world. And so to be asked to move to the back of the bus, she just like, no, I'm not doing that. She was tired. She was sick and tired of what was going on, and that there had been so much effort and not a lot of change happening, because she had been involved in a movement for social justice, racial justice, all her life on some level. And so that day was like the straw that broke the camel's back. So she was sitting in this discretionary section, on the aisle, in the aisle part of the seat, not the window, the aisle part of the seat. The person who was at the window, crossed over her, went to the back. All the other Black people went to the back, and she just sat there. And then the bus driver, looking at his rearview mirror, turning around, saw that she was still there, and said that she had to move. And she was defiant and said no. So he got up and said, and went back and said, well, I'm going to have you arrested. And she says, quote, you may do that. And she was so defiant and so sick and tired that she moved from the aisle seat and scooted over to the window seat. The window seat. To say, not only am I not moving, I'm going to move further in to the seat so you know that I am being very serious about this. So to Sarah's question, what was she, Pastor Sarah, was asking, she thought about a lot of things. The two main things that resonate with me is one, she thought about her family, those times on the porch with her grandfather while anticipating the possibility of the Klan and him sitting there with his rifle. And the positive things that her family had told her about who she was as a person, that she was somebody, those may not be the exact words, but given their baby girl a positive sense of self. This society might tell you certain things and down you and make you not feel like you are somebody, but you are somebody and you can do and accomplish anything. And so she dedicated her life to that. And this was her moment. The other very important thing is she was thinking about Emmett Till. Emmett Till. And probably could visualize the face, all mangled, beat up, and that coffin open. The face of racism for not just the United States, but the world to see. And she knew in that moment that even though she did not know what was going to happen, she was willing to be like a sacrificial lamb. She was willing to take whatever was going to come. Because she also said that if I don't do this, who will? Who will be the person? She had struggled for so long and Black people had struggled for so long. There's got to be a change. So on that day, the police came and got her. She didn't know anything could happen. She could have been lynched. She could have been beat up. She could have been found missing, which is another thing that happened in her town. Pine Level, when I said the Klan was very active, people would just show up dead, Black people. So she was not clear on what happened, but was willing to be the sacrifice on that day. And so when people found out that Rosa Parks had been arrested, Rosa Parks, she was well known in the community. Her husband was well known in the community. And so people rallied around her. The Montgomery Improvement Association that started the boycott, that had already been formed. There were two in Montgomery. There were two other people who had not given up their seat prior to her, but their cases were moot because they either paid the fine or actually one was a teenager who was pregnant, and that situation did not go forward because with a not just a local, but what would be a state and national issue, they didn't want to have a pregnant teenage young lady with the situation. So Rosa Parks was like the best example to hold up as somebody also very well known in the community and who'd been fighting the fight for a very, very, very long time. So all they had to do is say Rosa Parks, people galvanized, they moved forward. I'm not saying they wouldn't for anybody else, but Rosa Parks. And within 4 days, on December 5th, the boycott started and people walked to work, people bicycled, people got to work however they needed to make a point so that the bus company would lose money and possibly go out of business. But these people were so determined because they were so tired, sick and tired, kind of tired, that they were disgusted, that they were hurt, that they were just exhausted from all that had happened. And they throughout the decades, throughout the centuries, and enough was enough. So not only did people in Montgomery boycott, in Birmingham, these are things that aren't in your high school, well, elementary, middle school, or high school books. People from Birmingham. And when, I think, Sarah, you also, Pastor Sarah, you introduced me by saying that I was the Director of International Communications. That was in part for what we call the Quiet Strength Tour. Quiet strength because Rosa Parks was known for having quiet strength. And she could get upset, but she had quiet strength about it. And was always going to be a lady in terms of how she presented herself. So our tour started December 1st, and 40 years later, 1995, and we were in New York, and there is a CD called Quiet Strength that has well-known gospel and faith-based singers on it. And what is really cool, if you could find a copy, it definitely is a keepsake. In between each song is Mrs. Parks' voice saying something about the principle of whatever that song is. And the cover of it looks like this. This is the book called Quiet Strength. And as I said, the CD has a similar cover. And yes, I was on the tour. And yes, I am referenced in the book. So you'll see my name, not in the book, but in the foreword, in terms of my participation and appreciation for my effort with Rosa Parks. Those of us who went on the tour were called the Legacy Team. I was the youngest person on the team, and as I've grown in life, I realized the thinking behind some of that. Not only did I have experience in media, and I was the president of the Washington chapter of a journalism organization, but I have a law degree, and I have a real passion for civil rights. My family has been involved in civil rights, as I've mentioned, I think, in one of the previous meetings. Marching from Selma to Montgomery, the March on Washington, involved with SNCC, being freedom riders, all of that, because they grew up in the South. Even if they didn't grow up in the South, they just saw the injustice and wanted to make a difference. And my grandparents were like that, and my great-grandparents, blah, blah. So here I am, generations later, realizing that as part of that legacy team, I'm supposed to tell these stories to more than just my family and friends. So watching what is going on in the world today and watching the news, I said, I can't just sit here on the sofa watching the news. I have to get up and do my part to continue this legacy and share the story and to tell people what happened. I can even in another time compare it to some of the things happening today, but we've moved forward, but we've also moved back, and then we move forward and we move back. And I, like many people, wonder, when are we going to get to the point when we deal with this issue of race and racism, when we deal with the issues of slavery and come to an understanding of our one humanity, that we are all connected and we are all one in terms of people who are faith-based in terms of God. So I move forward with that effort. Getting back to the tour, I said December 1st, we were in New York at 12 noon. That CD I was talking about was played with the first cut on the CD. We went to a high school, and Mrs. Parks at that time was 82. And people asked, why would an 82-year-old want to go to 40 cities in commemoration of the boycott? And her answer was, people will feel differently if they see me, if they know who I am, they see me. I mean, not just know my name, but there's something that happens when you see people in person. On December 5th, we were in Montgomery and got a chance to see some of the people of that time from 1955 who were involved in the bus boycott, like Virginia Durr, her husband, um, the Abernathys, Reverend and Mrs. Abernathy, and what an experience that really stays with me that also speaks the importance of legacy is we were in one of the churches there and sitting in the front row, and the minister, when he got up, asked, this is a church with a balcony, he asked anybody who was involved in the boycott, could they please stand? And so those of us who are in the front row, we're the first, second row, we're turning around. More than 2/3 of that church stood up. And it just touched me to know that these are people who had the determination, the tenacity, the faith in wanting to make a difference, and they put their lives on the line for that, which means they were focusing not just on their own lives, but also for those, as Martin Luther King even talked about, those who were unborn. Those who were unborn. Now I was one of those unborn, but still knowing that people thought that much about their own dignity and the future of not just the race of African Americans or Blacks, but also the race of humanity. And it just really struck me, that visual of seeing all those people stand in the balcony and people behind us. So that was December 5th. We went to many other places, and that's for another time. I wanted to share that with you and let you know also that even in Rosa Parks' defiance, that it was because of who she was as a person, her growing up, her experiences, but also in her death. Her body was in Montgomery, and then her body was in DC at the Capitol, and then it went to Metropolitan AME Church, which is in DC, one of the oldest African American churches in part of the Underground Railroad. And I should say Rosa Parks is AME, African Methodist Episcopal. And from there she went to Detroit, and I went with my mother and my mother-in-law to Detroit to the funeral service. And it just was an awesome experience. They had the largest delegation of Congress people ever to attend a funeral. I remember when they all walked in, and they had people from different groups, denominations, from government, labor, etc. Because remember, Mrs. Parks, and I'm going to close with this, that Mrs. Parks, with her challenges in Montgomery, she lost her job. And losing her job, then she went to Detroit. Actually, at some point before settling in Detroit, I just want to add in there, because you know what I'm about to tell you is not in the books either. She worked at Holly Tree at Hampton University, which is in Hampton, Virginia. And I used to work at Hampton University, so I just found that interesting. Holly Tree at that time was both a hotel and a restaurant. Now it's just a restaurant. And then when she was in Detroit, she worked with Congressman Conyers and experienced the racial injustice in the North and got a chance to see how they weren't that much different. So she been a soldier in this Army for Social Justice all her life, and she's buried in the Detroit area. And it was just something to behold. So with that, I'm gonna conclude. You're gonna go into breakout rooms that Sarah shared. I'll be here afterwards to address any questions. And when we come together again next week, I'm going to talk about faith and religion and spirituality and how that helped to foster and to move forward Mrs. Parks in times of challenge, death threats, and and just living life in the uncertainty of what happened when she lost her job and then went to Hampton and then on to Detroit. Thank you.
Thank you, Beryl. That's wonderful. You all can unmute yourselves while I put you in breakout groups. And on the chat, on the text chat, which may be down towards your bottom, you should be able to see both a link to this tribute to Mrs. Rosa Parks, as well as the question. Hopefully that has gone out to everybody. But I am now going to move you all into breakout rooms and give you some time to discuss together, because there's lots to talk about. So let me see if I can figure this out. For those of you who have come back, just so you know, Marv might be on your screen. Marv is Beryl's husband, so I know him too. So like, I'm excited. I've got like friends on here that I've known for a long time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I saw this other Beryl Anderson. I'm going, what? There were two of her?
There are two of her.
I was like, I think that's Marv, but he's not showing his screen yet, so I'm not gonna call him out. But I am gonna bring everybody back. They should be.
Yeah,
I'm
we
gonna
kind of
close all
wrapped
their
ours up,
rooms.
so we decided to come back.
I appreciate that, because sometimes I'm closing rooms and I can just almost feel the internal screams of like, I was in the middle of talking and I'm having to come back.
Yep.
We thought maybe the world had gone on without us.
All right, as everybody is popping back in, I'm glad you guys have had a chance to have some time and discuss, and I hope that you got to some good stuff and that you had some good conversation in your groups.
Yep.
So I also was mentioning, in case you're wondering, there are two Beryl Andersons on your screen. So there's Beryl Anderson that you heard from, and then there's Marv, her husband. So Marv is on here as well. So he is a dear, sweet man. And the other piece I didn't tell you is also there's some singing skills that are pretty. look at Beryl's head just snapped up because I just told that.
Next week.
All right. All right.
Okay.
Well,
So come back next week for the singing skills.
that's right. There we go. That'll be our teaser.
Yes.
That'll be our teaser. I think everybody is back from breakout rooms. So one piece that we talked about is we'd like to give Beryl a chance to answer any questions and for you all to share any further discussion, but also being conscious of people's time and timing. If it's okay with you all, what I thought we would do now is we'd say the Lord's Prayer kind of all together. So then if people need to drift out or go do something or whatever, they can feel free to do that. I mean, I don't want you to feel obligated anyway, but I think it's kind of helpful to like, let's let you pray. And so you feel like if you need to go, you can go, but we have done that in community together, if that's okay with you all. Okay.
Okay.
So if you all want to unmute, or you can mute, whatever you want, but we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. All right. Our Father,
Father,
who
art
art
in heaven,
hallowed
hallowed
be
be thy name.
your
Thy
kingdom
kingdom
come,
come,
your will
thy
be
will be
done
done
on
on
earth
earth as it is
as
in
it is
heaven.
in heaven.
Give us
Give us
This
this day our daily bread,
and forgive us
Forgive
our
us our
sins
sins,
as we
as we
forgive
forgive
those who
those
sin
who
against
sin
us.
against us.
Save us from
and
the
Not
time
lead us
of
not into
temptation,
temptation,
and deliver us
but
from
deliver us from evil.
evil.
for thine is
Thine
the
is the
Thy
kingdom,
and
and
the
the
power
power
and
and
the
the
glory
glory
forever.
forever.
Amen.
Amen.
Tower of Babel.
Jeannie, that's exactly how I feel every time we do that, because we do the Lord's Prayer in all these different versions, and half the time I do a hybrid of what's current and then what's traditional, and whoever's following me is totally confused. So I love it that we all just say our Lord's
Just so
Prayer.
the Lord isn't confused.
Exactly. I think the Lord gets it. All right. Well, I would invite you guys to share whatever you're comfortable with sharing from your breakout rooms. If there's discussion that you want to talk about, I'm going to turn off the recording for this portion so that you may share whatever you need to share. I guess before I do that, maybe here's a question. Are there any questions you have for Beryl that maybe
Yes.
we should address first? Maybe let's do that first.
Yes.
So
Okay.
let's maybe do that for any questions. And then after that, we'll let you process more of your own internal thoughts. And I will stop the recording at you processing your own internal thoughts. Does that sound fair and good to
Yes.
people?
Mhm.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we have recording of any further questions that other people that watch this later may also have that they want to hear the answers to from Beryl, but also respecting your privacy and your own internal processing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we'll start with any questions for Beryl and then let me know when we need to drift into your processing and I'll shut off the record. Okay.
Sarah, this is Elizabeth. May I start?
Sure, please do.
Okay, so hi, Beryl. I do want to thank you again for not only talking tonight, but having, sat in and listened to the last 2 weeks. I'm the person that interviewed Pastor Dave and Marge, and I'm not going to interview you here, but I do want to bring forth a question that came from our whole group. You mentioned that the tour was in 1995 and that you went to 40 cities and that you were the international director or the international communications person. So our question was, how did this whole thing get organized? Who paid for it? Where other than the US did you go? And what would a typical day or meeting have been like that you did during those 40 cities?
Okay. First of all, thank you. And yes, I recognize that you were the interviewer. Great job with that. 40 city tour. I personally didn't go to all 40. There was a team, a legacy team. Who organized it? There is a organization called the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development, which is a nonprofit for Raymond is her husband, her meaning Rosa Parks. And who funded it? Different companies and corporations. I mean, even our flight, Delta, would pay for the seats. So different companies, corporations, small businesses, friends, family, whoever saw the vision and the purpose and the importance of commemorating not just the Montgomery bus boycott, because it wasn't just, there was a boycott and here's 40 years later. There were certain principles around that of moving forward, not just the African-American community, but the community, the larger community. So things like, I'm visualizing all of this. Let's see. Economics, parity in economics and housing and all the health, all the same issues that are going on today. And so her talk, well, there'd be a program every place that we went, which culminated generally with Mrs. Parks speaking. And if not, she would start it off. It just depended on how the program was arranged. Did you ask me who put the programs together? Because I don't want to.
I was asking, other than the United States, you had mentioned international. I was curious to know where else that program went.
For that program, the Bahamas, but Mrs. Parks also went to Japan. She received an honorary doctorate. But the Bahamas was the main place outside of the United States, at least that I went. I don't think that there was any place else other than that.
One other piece that I would ask Beryl, if you don't mind repeating it, when the first breakout room came back, we were kind of in the middle of talking about it, about while on the tour, where you all were supposed to stay at a hotel.
Oh.
Do you mind recapping that again?
Sure. Okay, it's 1995, and the second stop was Montgomery, and we were supposed to stay in a hotel, but because the racial climate was the way it was, kind of like today, there was a threat against Mrs. Parks. And so we stayed on military base. And they didn't tell us, the lead folks didn't tell those of us on the legacy team initially what was going on. But we, eventually they did. And because we saw we were going to this military base and we had police escort or it may have been military escort. And when we got to the base, Mrs. Parks stayed in one of the officers' suites. And what I found very interesting, not just me, all of us, was this was one of the suites that she used to clean.
Oh my.
Wow.
Oh my.
She is all these years later, coming back and staying there, not just as Mrs. Rosa Parks, but as a dignitary.
Oh my.
Oh.
What year was this?
1995.
Oh my.
And as Marv was pointing out at the time, that's 1995 death threats for what she symbolized and what this meant. And just, I had no idea of that at the time.
It's one thing that shocked our group and we talked about was this is still going on. In fact, it's gotten worse in the last few years and it's just time to stop. This is unbelievable that this is still going on in this day and age.
Yes, and on that note, another thing in the breakout, or Sarah,
I was just to clarify, Beryl's used to calling me Sarah because I'm just Sarah, right? So she's like, "Are you pastor yet? What are you anyway?" So
Oh yeah, you liked it when she called you pastor.
technically, you can only call
You
me.
liked it when she did though.
yes, I saw the smile.
I will own and admit I'm chomping at the bit for the pastor, but it'll come, and Vicar Sarah is great. So
Okay, so I wanted to get that title straight. So, Vicar Sarah, we spoke about I talked about the face of racism and Emmett Till, and my husband is saying, you need to tell them who Emmett Till is. Everybody may not know. He was 14 years old. He's from Chicago. He went to Money, Mississippi for the summer of 1955 to visit his relatives. And while he was there, he allegedly, I just want to get this straight, make sure I'm telling you correctly, allegedly was flirting with a white woman 4 days earlier before his murder. He was shot, he was beaten, he was drowned, and his body was in the river or body of water. It may not have been a river. And so his picture, his corpse is very painful to look at, even though the national and international press took a picture, again, the face of racism in the United States. So that's who Emmett Till is. And if you go to to Washington, D.C., to the African American Museum of History and Culture, there is a section there that has his first coffin, and I don't remember whether two, but anyway, his first coffin and some of the pictures from Jet Magazine and other publications. Anyway, so that's Emmett Till.
And just to add one other piece to that, you all may know I'm taking one class that I'm auditing at seminary this semester. It's the Theology of Liberation class. We had as an assignment within the last 2 to 3 weeks to go online and to look up some of the references to Emmett Till. You can certainly Google that. There's plenty of news reports about it, but you look that story back up, and the allegation was he was with, his cousins. He was known as a little bit of a jokester, and that he went in and bought like some candy in the store, and it was the woman behind the counter, and she was married, and the allegation was that he had flirted with her in there. He does admit that, like, after being out of the store, he whistled, like after the door was shut, and his cousins were horrified of like him whistling. But from his cousins and anybody else, it sounds like they said nothing happened in the store. And later the woman recanted and said she had made all of that up. So what happened was her husband and another man killed Emmett Till. They later admitted to that, and that's in a magazine as well. But the body was brutally, brutally beaten. And so if you Google that, just know the images are pretty horrific. But that's why it was such a huge thing, as Beryl mentioned, that was all over the news, both in the US and internationally, of it was just really a horrific situation. So if you don't know that history, I appreciate both Beryl and Marv recognizing like we need to make sure people know that if they're unfamiliar with it.
And
And that's
also,
the reason why the mom wanted it to be an open casket, because he was so brutalized and she wanted people to know.
Right.
It was-
yes.
Right.
And Rosa Parks, remember when Rosa Parks was looking out the window, waiting for the policeman, that's part of what she was thinking about. So
Yeah.
that gave her even more
Yeah.
courage.
Right.
Yeah.
Because whatever happens, happens.
And
Yeah, our breakout group said one of the things we appreciated you sharing, because we really did make that connection. I mean, we've all of us had heard about, the Rosa Parks story, probably various versions. None of them had helped us to make that connection between Inatel and the way you did. It's like, oh, I didn't even know that was in her mind, or even thinking about that I knew about those events, but never connected the two in some way. So appreciate you doing that.
one
Beryl?
one quick thing, just real quick. That Emmett Till happened in like August, and this is December, if a timeline helps. And I just want to interject. Should I shut off our record? Because it sounds like we're getting a breakout room stuff, and I want to honor that. So I'm gonna shut off the recording piece of this just to make sure people can talk freely. So I just wanted to tell you before I did that. Okay.